What's up, everybody? It's Travis here from Travis.media. When you build modern applications, you almost all the time want to use an API. In this video, I'm going to talk about why, and I'm going to walk you through a simple project with one of my favorite API frameworks. Let's get started. And actually, before we get started, earlier this week, I launched my coding community. It's a community for junior developers and aspiring developers to come together and reach their goals in a community, not in isolation. So it's a place for learning. It's a place for growth, encouragement, and accountability. Currently, we have about 26 members, and it's been a great couple of days. If that's something that would interest you, check out the video. I'll put a link above where I do a walkthrough, and then come join us. We'd love to have you there. So think about a .NET app or a Laravel app or something like that. You have models, which talk to your database. You have controllers, which control the logic. And then you have these views. And you build your web app, and it gets bigger, and your views get bigger, and your logic gets bigger. And it's all maintained in this one growing large code base. And if you decide later, hey, we want a mobile app version of this, then you have to go and build that separately. And then if you want a desktop app, you're going to build that separately. If you want like an IoT device, you'll build that separately as well. Now you got 4 code bases to maintain. That's not good. In a lot of this, duplication can be remedied by creating an API first. So with the API, you have models that will talk to the database. It will relate with your data. You have controllers that's going to handle the logic. And then you have routes. And this entire backend sits somewhere. And you have routes to interact with it. And once that's in place, you can create your web application with React or something like that. All you have to do is make calls to these routes. So I want to log in. That's a login route. Log out route, register routes, create post route, update, delete post routes. So once that API is in place, you can build out your web application. It's just a front end. You just take React and you make calls to your API. And then if you want a mobile app, you don't have to build this entirely separate thing. You just take React Native or Flutter or something like that and make calls to that same API. You want a desktop app? Same thing. Make calls to the API. Stripe integration? API. Where I'm going with this is now everything is an API. If you put that in place, you can connect anything to it. I've heard people compare it to like a USB port. You can put a pen drive there. You can charge your phone there. All things speak that language and can interact back and forth with your backend and your database. So given this fact, you need to make sure you're familiar with APIs. What is an API? How to build an API, things like routes and models, and basics like that. And that's regardless if you're back-end or front-end. If you're front-end, you still got to talk to the API. You got to know something about it. So today, we're going to take a look at one of my favorite APIs. It's a Python API called FastAPI. And it has so many neat and modern features that make it stand out as a way better alternative than using something like Flask as an API. And I'm going to give you 7 reasons why FastAPI is a better alternative and one that you should learn in 2023, 2024, whatever, whenever you're watching this. And I'm not going to go and give you 7 bullet points real quick why FastAPI is better. I'm actually going to build a simple to-do app so that I can show off these 7 key differences or 7 key advantages. So I don't want you sitting here watching me. Pull up your computer, pull up VS Code, and code along with me. It's going to be fun. I guarantee you'll get something out of it. So let's get started. First, let's create the Python project. So I'm going to cd into my desktop, and I'm going to make a directory called FastAPI project. Cd into that. And I'm going to create my virtual environment. So Python env. This is just a virtual environment. It's a way to get all of the things you need in a kind of sealed up, packaged environment. And now I'll open that in VS Code. And then I want to activate this environment. So source venv/bin/activate to activate it. And we're ready to go. And the first thing we want to do is to install the package. So let's go to tutorial-user guide and see if it tells us. So right here, install FastAPI. So let's do this pip install FastAPI. Install that. And while that's installing, let's grab the next package, which is UVcorn, which is a server that's going to run our API. And they're installing just the standard dependencies. So let's highlight that and run it. Awesome. And let's get some kind of sample here to get our API running. So to do that, let's go over to first steps and copy this code, and we'll talk about it. So I'll create a file called main.py and paste this in. And here's what's going on. We're importing FastAPI. We're instantiating a FastAPI class and saving that into the app variable. And right below it, you'll notice this is just plain Python. And that's FastAPI advantage number one. They've made it easy by keeping the syntax just plain Python. You can see here, if you know Python, you can make sense of it. So here we have a path decorator that says, hey, whatever method is below it is in charge of handling any requests going to /, which is going to be the root of our program. And that method is called root, and it returns some JSON of message hello world. And that leads us to FastAPI advantage number two, which is Async is built in. With FastAPI, we use ASGI, which handles requests asynchronously, whereas Flask uses WSGI, which handles requests synchronously. So that's one big benefit. It's async out the box. So async function, there it is. So we have a route, and we have a route that does something or produces some kind of data. So let's save that and figure out how to run the server. So that's right below it. You just copy this command. It explains right here what it does if you don't know. But I'm going to open this and paste in this command. And what it's doing is running a server for us. This first argument here is going to be the name of the file, which is main, so we don't have to change that. And then the instantiation of the class, which is saved in a variable called app, so we don't have to change that either. So if you save this in like api.py, it would be api:\app. Or if you change this variable to something else, you would replace the app. But we seem to be good to go. Let's hit return to run that server. And that's served here on port 8000 localhost, so we can open Postman or whatever you want to use, do a GET request to localhost 8000, and you should see hello world. Basic enough. So what we're going to do here to demonstrate FastAPI is just build a simple to-do app. So let's go ahead and create some comments for all of this. So here we're going to get all to-dos. Next, we're going to get single to-do. Then create a to-do. Update a to-do, and delete a to-do. And we're going to keep this video kind of short, so I'm not going to set up a database. We're just going to do to-dos equals list, an empty list, and we'll just push everything there and not persist it to a database for the sake of not having a really long video. And if you do want to build out this app further, there is a second and a third part to this. The second part is setting up a SQL database so that you can persist the FastAPI data to SQL. And then the third video will be building out a React app, just a simple React to-do app to talk to the API and pull data and post data and update data. Those two videos will be in the Travis Media community, so consider joining us. There will be links below to those. So let's go ahead and fill in these comments. So get all to-dos. Let's just copy this here, put it there, and figure out how to make this work. So let's change this path to to-dos. And we'll change the method to get to-dos. And then we want to return all of the to-dos. So that's pretty easy. Given that we have a list, we'll just put to-dos and we'll return the actual list of to-dos. So let's save that and try it out. So let's do /to-dos, send, and we have our empty list. Great. Next, let's skip down to create a to-do. Let's figure out how to do that. So let's copy this and paste it. We'll keep the path the same, but we'll change the get to post. And we'll want to pass in a to-do item. Now, the thing about APIs is you don't want sporadic and random data being sent to it. You want to have data validation. So if I have a to-do, I want to define what parameters that to-do accepts, and then not accept anything but that, so that our data is clean and we have a defined object. And that leads us to FastAPI advantage number 3, in that data validation is built in with Pydantic. So if we go back to the documentation and we go to request body, which is where we should be going for anything post, you'll see here that to declare a request body, you use Pydantic models with all their power and benefits. So you'll see here that we are creating an item, and that item is defined here with these values. So it has a name, a description, a price, and a tax. So when you create an item, if you're going to this route and you're creating an item, putting an item in the database, you got to follow these rules or it won't work. And that's what you want. So let's copy this and let's create a file called models. Models.py. Paste that there. And instead, we're going to do a to-do item, a to-do class, and we're just going to have two values. We're going to have ID, which is going to be an int, And then we're going to have an item, a to-do item, which is going to be a string. And that's it. We're going to keep it simple. So every to-do you create or get or whatever, it's going to follow this data model. And FastAPI has validation built in to confirm that. So let's jump back over here. And up at the top, let's from models import to-do. But down here, let's change this to create to-dos. We can keep the path the same. And what we'll do is we'll pass in the to-do item of type to-do. We brought that in, we brought in that model. Now we're saying this to-do that we're posting here has to follow that data model. And that leads us to FastAPI advantage number 4, and it's that FastAPI is typed. If this to-do was an integer, I can say int. If it's supposed to be a string, I can put string. I can declare types in Python with FastAPI. I love it. So this is going to be a type of to-do. So what are we going to do? Well, simple. We're going to do todos.append. So we're going to add it to this list. That's how we're going to create. Remember, we're not persisting. Todos.append to-do. And then if that's successful, we'll just say return message. And the message will be to-do has been added. Let's try that out. So let's go back here. Let's get to-dos. We don't have any. Let's switch this to post. Put some information in the body, which I already have. So ID is 1, and item is to edit a blog post. Let's send this. To-do has been added. Great. Now let's get and make sure our to-do is there. And there it is. Post finished. So we've appended that to our list. Now let's jump up to the single to-do. So I'm going to copy this, paste it because I don't like typing so much. And here we need to pass in an ID for the to-do item we want to get. So if we come over here and go to path parameters, and you'll see here we can pass in a dynamic item ID. This can be anything. And then that will, because it's in this decorator, correlate to this item ID that we're passing into the function. And if you scroll down a little further, you'll see that we can also type that. So let's go back, and we're going to add here to-do ID. So we can add that to the path. And then down here, we're going to pass in to-do ID, and we're going to make sure it's an int. If I didn't do that, Python would guess that it was a string, and it would mess me up. Because when I want to compare the string to the actual ID, it's not going to match. So we need to declare that an integer. So type your parameters. So here, I'm going to make it easy and just do a loop for to-do and to-dos. If, and here we're looping through this, and our to-do is our individual item. So if to-do.id is equal to this to-do ID that we're passing in. If that's the case, we want to retrieve it. Return to-do and the actual to-do item. And then down here, if nothing is found, and FastAPI has some good built-in error codes, but we're just going to do message. And here we'll say no to-dos found. So let's try that out. Open up Postman. And let's do a get. Should be nothing there because when we refresh the server, we lose that temp data. So let's go ahead and post this again. So post it, then we can get and see if it's there. Yes. Now let's try to get individually the to-do with an ID of 1. So hit send, and there it is. And you're probably like, what is the point of this? We're just saving it to a list. And you're right. But what you can do is you can get it all functional, and then you can go in and swap it out for your database. You can set up your database, and then where it's like to-do.append to append it to the list, there you just do database.write or whatever it is. You just write it to the database. So you can do this and then add the database functionality next. So we have all to-dos, single to-do, and we can create a to-do. Let's do delete next, because delete's always the easiest. So I'm going to grab this and paste it here. And I'll call this delete. And actually, before we do that, we didn't change the name of this function. Instead of get to-dos, let's do get to-do. And then I'm just going to copy this, and we'll work on the delete, which should be easy. So this needs to be changed to delete. To-dos, and then we'll pass in the ID for the delete as well. And here we'll change this to delete to-do. Keep the ID. And then we'll loop through just like we did here. And if the ID matches, we'll do a to-dos.remove to-do. So we're removing that from the list. And then we can return a message that says to-do item or to-do has been deleted. So let's save that and try it out. Again, let's check. We should have nothing. Now let's post this item. And we can get to make sure it persisted. Yes. And now let's delete it. So we're going to delete with the to-do with an ID of 1. Send. The to-do has been deleted. Let's make sure our list is empty. And it is. So delete's working too. Now let's do update. Let's finish with update. Update's always a little bit more complicated. But here's the thing. FastAPI is just Python. So let's try to do this without even looking at the documentation. So let's grab this again. And there's a number of ways you can update data. You can do a put where you replace the whole object. We only have 2 fields, so I'm just going to replace the 2 fields. You can also do a patch where it's going to update selectively. But here we'll just do app.put. And here we are going to update based on the ID. And let's change this to update to do. And here's the thing, we are passing in the ID. That's going to help us identify the to-do that we're updating, but we also need to pass in the to-do data. So let's put a comma here and pass in a to-do of type to-do. And here again, we'll just use a loop. There's other ways you could do this. We'll loop through them. And if the IDs match, then we'll update the 2 fields. So to-do.id equals, and this is not comparing, this is changing the value, so 1 equal sign. To-do.id equals to-do ID, and the to-do.item, which is the other value in our data model, needs to equal the to-do. And we're probably going to have a little contradiction here because we have to-do here and to-do here. So let's change this to to-do object. And here we can say to-do item equals to-do object dot item. So this to-do, we're looping through. This is our individual to-dos. The item value is going to be replaced by this to-do object item value, which we're passing in, which is going to be the new object. Hope that makes sense. And then we'll return the new to-do. So return to-do and to-do. And then here we can put no to-dos found to update. Now let's try this all out. So let's get it. We have nothing. Let's post this. And then let's do a get again. We do have that item. Now let's change this to, instead of edit a blog post, let's do delete a blog post. Let's see if that works. So here we're going to do a put, and we're going to pass in the ID, and we're going to send this data, and it's going to overwrite our ID and overwrite our item. Now with the database, you don't really have to overwrite the ID. You don't have to mess with the ID because the database is going to increment that in whatever way you set it up to. But anyway, this should change the item to delete a blog post. So let's send it. And it returned the new to-do. Now let's do a get and make sure that it updated. Send, and there it is. Delete a blog post. Now I got ahead of myself. There are actually 2 more fast track advantages. One is that errors are in JSON, whereas with Flask, they would show up in the HTML. And then fast track advantage number 7 is that there is authentication built in. So check this out. It supports HTTP basic auth, OAuth tokens or JOT tokens, and header API keys. This is by default. And actually, I can't even count. The last one was supposed to be 6. So fast track API advantage number 7 is that if you open this in a browser, so I'm at localhost 8000, if you do a /docs, you get a Swagger UI. So if you have stakeholders that want to see how this works, or you have front-end developers that need access to the data, or for any other reasons you need a user interface to represent your API, you get Swagger built in. So if I go to post, I can click try it out. I can set an ID of 1 and an item of mow the lawn. Execute, and I can see I have a 200 response. My response body is to-do has been added. Then I can run up here to this get route, try it out, execute, and see that I have my to-do. So I can demo my API to someone, use it to develop, or whatever I need. I have Swagger built in with FastAPI. And then, of course, I have my get, put, and delete routes as well. If you implement authentication, there will be a button up here where you can authenticate, where you have to authenticate in order to use these routes, and so forth. And if your flavor is ReDoc, which is another graphical API tool, just type in ReDoc instead of docs, and you get that built in as well. Wonderful. Now that's a very simple API. If you go back to the documentation, I pretty much just explained a lot of this user guide. There are other things like cookie parameters, header parameters, nested models. There's more things you could do, form data, and you can go through these and see examples as your API grows. But there's also a section called Advanced User Guide. So you can click on this and you can see there's just so many things this API can do. It's very modern, it's very fast, it's Python, it's typed, it's async, there's authentication built in. There's great documentation. Here's your relational databases, your NoSQL databases. It's all here. So APIs are super duper important. And hopefully you've seen here how fun it could be to build one. So I hope you enjoyed it and I hope you continue to build it. Think about some project you can start and go through this documentation and learn APIs. That's all I want you to do. If you found this video helpful, give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video.